What's going on? Welcome to the first lecture from Unit 5, Cognition, or Cognitive Psychology, having to do with thinking. All right, this is a huge unit, 13 to 17% of the AP exam, almost double what the last unit covered. So it's an important one. This first lecture video is going to be an introduction to memory, okay, and some of the memory processes. So in class, we talked about how cognition has to do with the fact that our memory, thinking, and language are incredibly powerful, but they are not perfect. So we're going to talk about what our brain does well and what our brain has trouble with in terms of our cognition, our thinking, which involves memory and language as well. So in class, hopefully you wrote down these terms, these bold words about what cognition is and then the different aspects of cognition. Okay? Memory, in class we talked about there are three parts of memory. So it's your brain changing, so information from the outside world getting into your brain, that information staying in your brain, storage, and then you being able to get that information out when you need to. Okay? Today's lecture is mostly going to be about encoding. The next homework video will be about these other aspects of memory, the storage and then retrieval, getting information out. So today we're mostly talking about encoding, how we take information into the brain. Okay? So if you want to write this down, so this is kind of like a continuation of our class notes. Roman numerals 1 and 2 we did in class. The Roman numeral 3, encoding, is how we get information into the brain. So there's two ways our brain can change. There's some information from the world around us that our brain just automatically takes in without you having to try very hard. We call that automatic processing. Automatic, it's just natural. Okay? Information that might impact your survival. So if I asked you about the last time you ate, when was it and what did you eat, your brain will remember that. Okay, think about it. When was the last time you ate? What did you eat? Right? Your brain remembers that because that is important for your survival. Okay? You didn't have to practice that information. You did not make flashcards this morning or last night where you had to review, okay, what did I eat? What did I eat? Oh, I had pizza. That's right. Okay. Whew. All right, flashcard. What did I eat last night? Oh, pizza. That's right. You didn't have to try very hard to process this information. Your brain just does it. Your brain naturally just kind of keeps track of where were you when certain things happened, what time of day was it, how many times have you seen that person, that car, that thing, whatever it is. There's some things your brain just processes on its own. Okay? In contrast, there are some things in life that you have to try hard to process. We call this effortful processing. It's a lot of the school stuff, right? When you're making like a Quizlet account or playing a quizzes, right, or a Kahoot, that is you making a conscious effort and paying attention to information to try and get your brain to change as a result. So, automatic and effortful processing. This is natural. This takes work. So let's talk about what it looks like when we are trying to learn something, when we're trying to remember something and having difficulty with it. So, typically we have to practice. We call this rehearsal, okay? Deliberate practice. It's not just good enough to look at the word over and over and over again. You have to do something where your brain is working hard to recall this information. So I bet in classes where you've had to give a presentation about content, I bet you remember that information better than the classes where you just took a quiz and moved on with your life. Because the more you practice, the more engaged your brain is, the more likely you are to remember that information in the future. Okay? So we call this elaborative encoding. To be elaborate means to be complex. You're going above and beyond. You're not doing something simple. You're doing something deeper. Okay? And I want you to put a star by this term, semantic. It'll come up a little later in the unit when we talk about language. But this word semantic, whenever you see this word semantic, it has to do with meaning. When you really get the deep down meaning of a term, an idea, a concept, it's going to stick in your brain a little bit better. Okay? So, we do deep elaborative encoding when we're really trying to get information. Sometimes in life, we do what's called maintenance. It's for more simple learning. So let me give you an example here. Okay? Structural is if I show you a list of words, Structural encoding would be you thinking about, like, what does the word look like? Acoustic encoding is like, what does the word sound like? Semantic encoding is, do you truly understand the meaning of the word? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example here, and if you need to come back to the slide and jot down the bold words, that's fine. But imagine that I'm showing you a list of words. Okay, let's say that one of these words is the word date. Well, structural encoding is if I just showed you a list of words and said, look at the words and look at whether or not they were in capital letters. Okay, so is this word in capital letters? You would say, yeah. Okay, that's just you paying attention to the structure of the word. Now, what if I show someone else a list of words, like this one, and I say, does this word rhyme with wait? It's spelled differently, but does this word rhyme with the word wait? Yeah. What you're doing now is you're thinking about the sound of this word. So not just the visual aspect, but the phonemic, the auditory aspect of this word. Now, let's say there's a third person who they get a list of words, and they're asked, would the word fit in the sentence? He took a blank to the party. Well, he took a date to the party. Does that sentence make sense? Yeah, it does. Okay. So what they did is they had 3 different groups of people, and they showed them a list of words, and all they were doing was answering either visual, auditory, or meaning-based questions. And then later, maybe a couple days later, they showed them a list of words and said, hey, was this one of the words on your list? And what they found is that if all the person had been asked to do was look at the visual structure of the word, whether that was capital letters, they had only about a 10 to 15% chance of remembering that word later on. The people who thought about the sound of the word, they did better. They had about a 55 to 60% chance of remembering that they had seen the word. But the folks who were asked a deep semantic question about the meaning of the word, they had almost a 90% chance of remembering that word later on. When your brain is more engaged doing elaborative rehearsal, that information sticks in your brain more. That's why I and your other teachers are always asking you to try and get deeper with the content and make connections between new vocabulary and old vocabulary that's already in your brain. Because the deeper we can get you thinking about these words and concepts and terms, the more likely it is that you'll remember and be able to recall and recognize these words later on an assessment or when you're trying to apply it to a situation in life. Okay? So when you get a new word, how do we get the semantic meaning from it? Well, typically what your brain does is your brain tries to figure out what words does this term go with? Like, what are some other concepts and ideas that are kind of related to this new term, this new idea, this new concept? So, for example, if I talk to you about a specific dog here, if I introduce a new breed of dog to you, right? Something you've never heard of before. If I say, oh, the Burmese mountain dog. If I say, well, Burmese mountain dog, it's a working dog. And I say, it's kind of like a Great Dane, okay? That might actually help you place, okay, so it's probably going to be a bigger dog. It might help you understand where this dog fits in to your knowledge of dogs and how dogs relate to other animals, right? So categories and hierarchies, meaning levels. Let me give you another example, okay? In science class, maybe, you talked about how to sort animals, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So, there are different types of animals, and a way to figure out what category an animal goes into is you might say, well, is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? If it's a vertebrate, is it warm-blooded or cold-blooded? If it's warm-blooded, what insulates it, right? If it's an arthropod, well, does it live on land or does it live in the sea? And if I'm introducing a new term or concept to you, what your brain does is try to kind of fit it into the category or the level, the hierarchy where it belongs. And that helps you remember things in the future because it's forming more connections, so more neurons are forming a network around this new concept, new idea. Okay? So when you see a new word, or really when you see any word, what happens is your brain automatically will do one of two things. You'll either picture the word, or you'll picture the thing, the object, the concept, the idea. So dual coding theory states that when I say a word, when I say kangaroo, you either picture the word kangaroo or you picture an actual kangaroo. visual or verbal? And guess which of these is actually better if you want to try and remember something in the future? Well, they say that visualizing is better. Okay? Visualizing is better. Remember the very first week of school we did that activity where I read out some sentences to you? And half of the class was told to repeat something, and half of the class was told to visualize that idea. Well, who did a better job at remembering the terms, the concepts, the characters, the actions? The visualizers did. Okay? That's more powerful because that's deep semantic encoding. Okay? So what we're going to do now is move on. Roman numeral 6 is I'm going to tell y'all some different strategies, some different things that actually improve your memory when you're trying to take information in. Remember, the next video is going to be about how information gets stored or how we pull information out. But this is about how we take information in. So one thing, the first strategy to help your memory is called the spacing effect. Okay? I want you to imagine I have 3 different students here. They all study for 4 hours total, but one student studies for 4 hours, just like the night before the test. One student studies for an hour on 4 different days, or maybe like morning, afternoon, and then another student studies for 8 different segments for about half hour each. They all study for 4 hours. Guess which student is going to do the best? Well, if you look over on the right, Leslie gets an A, Leanne gets a B, and Nora gets a C. Spacing effect says it's best if we space out our learning. Okay? Our bell schedule is not good for the spacing effect. In the perfect world, we should have 5 classes a week of like an hour each. That would be the best way for your brains to learn because a little bit each day is way better than what we have, which is like these block schedules where I only see y'all 3 times a week. Last week it was only twice, right? The spacing effect says it's better to have smaller chunks on more days. And part of that has to do with the fact that while you sleep, your brain consolidates these memories. And so it's nice if you learn a little bit and then get to have a sleep, and learn a little bit and have a sleep, and learn a little bit and have a sleep. It helps that information stick in your brain. Other things that impact your encoding. A guy named Ebbinghaus, put a star by his name, did some research on how we can relearn information and why we forget information. Okay? So what he did was he took what's called nonsense syllables, these made-up 3-letter words. He had people memorize them, and then he had them come back later and try and recall them on the next day. And what he found was that, and this makes sense, the more you practice on day 1, the less time it takes you to relearn the material. So his big idea, Ebbinghaus, having to do with nonsense syllables, is that the more you practice, the more the information is going to get encoded. Okay? So what we have here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but this green line is the learning curve. It says if you review the information as you go, okay? So with your AP psychology content, you shouldn't, watch this video one time and then not think about this video again until the test. You should watch this video day 1, and then you should look back at those notes during our quiz, perhaps. And then you should look back at the notes again before you take the test. And then you'll see the content again on the test. And then you'll see the content again while you're doing test corrections, hopefully, right? My goal is to give y'all, it says here, 5 exposures, 5 reviews is what really helps you retain the information, okay? In contrast, if you watch this lecture video and then don't look at the content again until the AP exam, you're going to forget that information. That's what the forgetting curve says here, is the more exposure you have to a concept, the more different times you practice and review it, the more likely that information is going to stick in your brain, okay? Other things you can do, mnemonic devices or memory tricks. There are whole books written, if you have trouble with your memory, whole books written about memory. There's a guy who went to the World Memory Championship. He had a really bad memory, so he wanted to see what memory experts looked like. So he went to this championship, and they were like, anybody can improve their memory. And he didn't believe these memory nerds. So he was like, well, I'm going to write a book about these people. And you know what? He was like, I'll spend a year trying out their strategies, trying out their practice, see, if I can improve my memory at all. And what he found was that in a single year, he went from having a terrible memory to actually winning the United States Memory Championship because he learned some tricks for memory. It's a fascinating book. It's called Moonwalking with Einstein. I might have a copy of it, or we can probably get it from the library or something. But I highly recommend if you want to improve your memory It's all these tricks involving visualizing and strategies and techniques for improving your memory. Other things you can do to improve your memory, something called chunking. It's when you have a lot of information, grouping certain information together, okay? I want you to write down this guy's name, George Miller, and write down this magic number, 7 plus or minus 2, okay? I know that's not really a number, but that's what his magic number is referred to. 7 plus or minus 2. So really, he said the average person can remember just 5 to 9 things at a time. That's all we can hold in our memory at any one moment. Okay, so like if I ask you to remember all of these letters, try and remember this sequence. Okay, so I'll give you about 10 seconds to look at these letters and see then if you can recall them. Okay, so test yourself. Can you recall those 12 letters? Didn't give you very much time. You might remember the first 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, right? Maybe up to 9, right? That's what George Miller said. You can remember maybe up to 9 things, but it's really hard to remember more than 9 things, okay? So test yourself. Here's what it was, okay? Now imagine that I gave you these letters, FBI, NBC, CIA, and IBM. How many things am I now asking you to remember? Just 4 things. That is within George Miller's magic number. Try it. See if you can now write down those exact same 12 letters, but now that you have chunked the information. I can do it. FBI, NBC, CIA, IBM. Nailed it. Okay. Chunking helps you with your memory. Okay. Putting things into associated groups. Something else that helps your memory. When you make the content relevant to yourself. Okay. I don't know if y'all know Coach Prophet, Mr. Ryan Prophet. I'm friends with him and his brother, Travis Prophet. And Ryan's brother, Travis, Mr. Prophet's brother, was once on a game show. I think it was Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Something like that. And when I first met Travis, somehow this came up, and he said, oh, here's the question I missed. He said, what famous boat captain once said, I have not yet begun to fight, or something like that. It was some quote. And I said, oh, it was John Paul Jones. And Travis Prophet was so mad at me because he had missed out on, I don't know, $100,000 or $200,000 in the game show because he didn't know the answer to the question. He's like, well, how do you know that it was John Paul Jones? And the reason why I know it's John Paul Jones is because I'm a Jones, right? My grandfather's name was John Paul Jones. He was named after this captain. So I just happen to know this random fact because it's somehow relevant to me, right? My favorite baseball player growing up was Chipper Jones, C. Jones, because I'm a C. Jones. When information seems personal and relevant to you, when you can find that you have something in common with somebody, it actually helps your brain remember that person a little bit more because it makes your brain feel like that thing is a little bit more meaningful. Okay. Another thing about how we remember to be aware of, put a star by this term, the serial position effect. Not cereal like the kind you eat. Serial, meaning a list, an order. Okay? If you ever buy something, there's a barcode on it. This number tells you in what order was this device or object or toy made. Okay? The serial position effect states that our brain is really good at remembering the things that come early in a list and remembering the things that come at the end of a list. And we'll do an activity in class about the serial position effect. But basically what they did is they gave people a list of words, and then some time went by, and they said, okay, how many of the words do you remember? And what they found is that they were really good at the first couple items, words on the list. So the 1, 2, 3, they had over a 50% chance of remembering those words. They were pretty bad at remembering the middle words on this list of 15 words. And if they had a short delay, they got a little bit better at the stuff at the end as well. This blue line demonstrates the serial position effect, okay? And one way you've seen this in life is if you've ever been in a class or a group where like everyone's in a circle introducing themselves, you're most likely to remember the people who introduce themselves first and the people at the very end of the line at the circle. You have trouble with the folks in the middle. That's just how the brain works. It pays attention to the things that are early on. We call it the primacy effect, and things that happen towards the end of the list. We call that the recency effect. So we'll do some activity with that in class. Just a quick check for understanding. How do you define memory? What are the 3 aspects of memory? What's the difference between shallow and deep encoding? And what's another name for deep encoding? Make sure you know that S word. And then number 4, in this example, how is Micah thinking about these terms, these concepts? We'll talk more about this in class. Appreciate y'all. Peace out.